I'm Jane Schulak, the author of At the Artisan's Table, and this is Carolyn Englefield, our brilliant moderator, and we're going to begin.
Welcome. Thank you for coming, and I'm delighted to be here to speak with you and to talk to you about your new book, At the Artisan's Table. So first, tell us about you, Jane, as a designer and founder of your nonprofit organization, Cultural Lab Detroit.
Well, everything I do is a collaboration, and I kind of think that as designers, that's something that we all should probably share, that we're all, we're collaborating with history, we're collaborating with somebody else's work, we get inspired by the work, and there are some very, very strong individuals in Detroit that are artists, designers, artisans, whose work is steeped in history. So it's particularly interesting how it expresses itself, or how they express themselves now when there's this very historical kind of synergy going on. And they have definitely helped shape me as a designer and to understand the importance of collaborating or creating a conversation between the eras. So,
okay. And so then just to move fast forward a little bit, because that's one segment of her career and her involvement in the art world as a designer. So David Stark, who is part of the cultural design group, correct? And also the co-author of your book.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go into the book pretty soon, and he is a
big part of my life.
A big part of your life. So let's talk about
So David and I met because years ago, I was looking for somebody to help me design my daughter's wedding. I thought I was looking for one thing. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but what I found was David, who was particularly interesting because he really is a collaborator and an artist. And so we made the wedding, became really good friends.
And that was how long ago?
That was 12 years ago. Started to, immediately after the wedding, he dumped his office plans in my lap and said, 32,000 square feet, Jane, do it. Okay. But I dumped something big in David's lap, and that was Cultural Lab Detroit. And what David taught me was how to have a creative idea and give it a structure. And that was huge. And so ever since us kind of like trading services and me designing for him helping me develop this platform, which is very art-based, similar in a lot of ways to David Stark Design. It became very natural for us to collaborate on many levels. Sometimes we work for each other, sometimes we don't work at all, and sometimes we obviously with the book work together. And so then, and it was, then the book was born.
So this is what we're going to start to talk about now. So how then did you begin to work at the Musée des Décoratifs? Was the book a concept then, or did it become a concept after?
My work at the museum started a little bit before David Stark. So at the same, but kind of at the same time that I met him. So I've always been really passionate about the decorative arts and objects. Things that are useful things, but really gorgeous, that are historical and new. So I love the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris because it's like being in a great big house. And these are all objects that families leave because they don't, have a place for them, and they then become part of the museum. So I joined the board and I became super active, and I started to design lunches for fundraising purposes, where I would pick an old object, this is a lot like the book actually, pick an old object from a particular department, find an artist whose work is inspired by whatever it is I'm talking about, and design a room together.
So for example, because I didn't realize that happened before the book was even. It happened
before and during, not during the book, but before I met David was the first one, which I did with paper. And it was pretty fabulous. And then once David and I were friends, I did two more that kind of happened. And that really was a big part of segueing into the book.
Okay. And then take us fast forward a little bit. So, explain to our guests, what the process was. What was the lens that you went through to go through the creative process?
So without being too heavy duty, we had to have a process, or else, because everything, there are so many gorgeous things, so many amazing artists, so many beautiful
because
places.
you knew now you wanted to try to do a book.
Right. We wanted to do a book,
idea.
but like, how do you choose?
Exactly.
Because there's a million choices. We wanted to do a book about the art, you know, art on the table, but like where or how? So there's a very fabulous library, very gorgeous library at the Museum of Decorative Arts, and it's a decorative arts library, which was a huge help. And there's a key that when you walk in, that's very old, very beautiful, that sort of lists all the different important periods, topics in decorative arts, like blue and white, insects, a lot like what I did in the book. So that gave me the idea to sort of categorize it, because I had to have some kind of a structure, like what are we writing about? Then we started this interesting process, because I was so involved in that particular museum, of choosing the topics. And then I took my time for months and looked at objects in the museum, and then eventually branched out to the Met, to the V&A in London, to Sèvres in Paris, to several other museums, or small and large, but it began with that.
Right. And so that's the platform for which her book has been done. And when I got the book and was asked to do this talk, I was fascinated, because we have so many things in common. And we're going to get to the Paris story next, and who some of her mentors were. I think our time overlapped when we were there together.
Probably.
And I'm just going to share with you in a minute, we're going to stop talking and we're going to go through some of the chapters of the book, some of my favorites, her favorites, because we talked about the ones we love. We might not get through them all, but we'll try to highlight aspects from each one. But I wanted you to understand the process, how we got to this stage, to the chapters. So how she did, not me. I'm just helping talk about it. But so let me just, I want them to hear this part.
Carolyn knows she's going to stop me if I'm getting like too long.
You're fine.
It's fine.
So she was in Paris. How long were you there working in the library, just trying to work?
Many trips. Many trips.
And during that time, you met many very influential people who became your muses, or not your mentors.
So I think the other singularly most important part about Jane as a designer is that I was super fortunate to have amazing people in my life, starting with David Hicks. I don't know if you guys know who David Hicks was, but he was like the colorist, one of the great decorators ever. So it started with my very, very strong friendship with David Hicks. Right when he passed away, he had a crazy personality. And this is very typical of David, but when before he passed away, I said, what am I going to do? Like, he said, Jane, it's going to be terrible, because there's nobody as good as I am. But there are two people in Paris. They're okay. I said, all right, fine. Who are they? And one was Barbara Worth. I don't know if people have heard of her. And the other is a man who was so under the radar and such a genius, Christian Baden. And the two of them, I had to coax them to sort of take me under their wing. Basically, I said, you'll have to kill me, you'll have to shoot me to get rid of me. I'm never leaving, and I never did. And I ended up having 18 glorious years, coupled with the 2 or maybe 4 that I had with David Hicks, that really was my master's and my PhD. And also Christian's first cousin was Hubert de Givenchy, who also took me under his wing. And each one of them had very different styles, very sophisticated, and their specialty was embossing me around. They had so much to say to me and to tell me what I did wrong. Even I'd get phone calls. I'm not sure I like what you wore that night. I mean, you name it, they said it. But really, those were the funny things. There was major learning that went on. And so that was huge.
And just a side note, the funny part of this opportunity for us to do this talk together is we didn't know each other. And when I'm reading her book and I'm reading the introduction, I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been a magazine editor for 35 years at House and Garden, House Beautiful, Veranda. And I photographed Givenchy's home in Paris, and I photographed Le Jonger in the country, and I photographed Barbara Viert's garden in Normandy. Yes. And we didn't know this, but we just talked the other day. We were like, I can't believe that our paths just crossed and now we're having this talk.
Huge crossing.
And those people were tremendously inspiring to me as well, because you cannot be in their company and not, learn something just by observation. But in any case, so they were very influential to you, introduced you to a lot of artists
What
and
I
things.
have to say is that they taught me a language that they gave me permission to speak a language that I was always meant to speak, but couldn't find the words. And really, I owe everything to them that way.
Okay, so that's the backstory.
Okay.
You get a little bit of her bio, a little bit of mine, and then now we're going to start to talk about the book. And now you can see some of the things that we both love. I'm going to start by saying the cover of the book actually is another person we share in common. And I'm going to set you up for this, and then you explain to everybody. We forgot to mention that for each chapter of her book, you chose a muse. That's what you called it, right? The muse from the library. And in this case,
or from the museum.
Or from the museum.
Yeah, there are three components that are always seen in every chapter. One is the one, or could be three, but museum objects and then there's the artist or artisan or studio workshop that makes something that we felt was inspired by the object. And then there's the collaboration that David and I designed, the tabletop. And without getting long and boring, there are actually a lot of threads going back and forth in every direction with every single piece on the table. Because again, how do you set the table? I mean, there's 1,100 different ways. So I kind of forced myself into a box or into a container. Like, you have to have that connection or it can't be on the table. So
in this case, this is chapter 2 in the book, and the chapter is called Insects. And Insects is the muse. And I will let you, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And I will let you explain to them. First of all, tell them where we are.
Well, we're in a very, very famous apartment that has been sold by somebody named Susan Goodfriend. And a very, very famous designer designed it, Henri Samuel from Paris, years back. The screens behind are from a very important, I forget the name, but they're in the book, a very important Swedish castle. This was a treasure trove to design within and to make it all fit. One of the things I did, because we did work with a young new artist who had plates with insects. I brought over the pieces and put them before we even shot the chapter, because Susan is a good friend, to make sure that they held up to like the 18th century fabulousness of her apartment. And they did. A funny, quick story, and then we'll move on, about insects. One of the things that I learned from the curator at the Met, because our objects from insects, they come, I think this is mostly the Met. Insects, in the 18th century, there were little insects on plates. You can find them, or butterflies or things. And often they're there because they would make a mistake and they didn't want to, throw the dish out, or they didn't have the money. And so instead they would paint over the crack or over the mistake, and they put an insect there. So it's kind of an interesting, quirky story.
So these plates were the ones that you selected from?
Yes, these are actually from the Met.
Right.
Yes.
And then this was
and this is the artist, and he was so charming, and he's so like 18th century.
And how did you find him?
I just have good radar. I searched and searched. I don't know. Through friends and Google, and which kind of connects us to everything.
And he was the one that painted the plates that are on the table in Susan Goodfriend's dining
with the
room,
insects.
or garden room.
Yeah.
So what is another example of a category that you selected, and the muse in this case, for example?
Well, this is bamboo, and these are objects from the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, I believe. And I included a bamboo chair because you have to have a chair at the table. And also, this was one of the first chairs that then was taken off as a design, as the Charivari chair that everybody uses for all the parties. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And
where did you create this room? It's so beautiful.
we actually created this room in David's studio. And what I did is I went to, now I'm forgetting the name of the person, it's in the book, where I got the wallpaper, and they gave us, it's in Paris, it'll come to me. We'll look in the book. Anyways, they gave me, I was like really moved by all of their different papers. And this is kind of a thing I do as a designer. I'm very into like layering and textures and colors. And so I took all the different papers and I literally tore them and designed this collage behind it, and then added the bamboo and painted the Gucci colors of green and red, which is a little bit hard to see on the bamboo. But, and our muse is Buccellati, which I don't know if you have one of the Buccellati pictures.
No, I don't, but that was a question. The muse was bamboo, was the
Buccellati that was designed years ago for Agnelli on his boat.
And that's the flatware?
That's the flatware
that you chose,
it's
right?
There. Yeah, and then I just kind of moved between periods with design. The dishes are Limoges, newish, the old Majolica. There is old Majolica. It's a little hard to see in this picture, but there is old Majolica, actually from a very famous collection that was another designer, Serge Royot. It was his collection that we got the pieces from. So
well, I thought it was so creative and so inspiring.
Oh, that's just a studio picture. This was actually shot during COVID, and we weren't allowed to go to the Buccellati studio in Milan. So they sent us these different pieces that they use, and those are some handles. Do you want me to talk about this?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
okay.
This was another image I loved.
This is one of my favorites. This was shot in Detroit. So we had to do a lot of shooting during COVID. We had to finish the book. It had gone on for a lot of years. So we decided to just go for it and do it in Detroit. This is a church actually that I've worked in several times for Culture Lab. It's called Woods Cathedral, and it's an abandoned church, but it still has these fabulous frescoes. So this is a chapter called Forbidden Fruit, and what you can't see is that the tablecloth is a little bit dirty. It's got people that are embracing and they're not dressed. And these are the dishes. These are the dishes. This is an artist named Philip Eglin, who's a brilliant ceramicist. And his subject matter, I have two different tables that I did in the church, very different actually, but his subject matter is always kind of the same, and different kinds of dishes, popes and prostitutes. And so we set it up sort of like Adam and Eve, like we have the figs and the fig leaves, and the
photo that was not shown here, but was the plate that you selected was of Adam and Eve, and it was a Delft piece, right?
Right,
Explain
yes, that's a piece that was actually from the museum. That's, I think earlier, it's before even 18th, I think it's like 16th century.
Yeah, it was an 18th century glazed earthenware dish that was thought to be Delft. So that was the inspiration.
So that was one of the tables that we did at the church, and then we had another one. This is Philip in his studio in Wales, of which I went and visited him. He's amazing. This is from our black chapter, Black Basalt. And this was a really, really interesting chapter because David said to me, I want you to figure out a way to work with the color black. And I said, okay. What I realized, and this is actually one of my favorite chapters, is that there are so many magnificent shades. And I worked very hard to come up with the different shades and the different tones and the different textures. And I'm super proud. And then these are Wedgwood, some new, some very old, all Wedgwood black basalt pieces.
So I thought this was a fantastic chapter, and I happen to love black basalt also. Oh. And I was so inspired. So I took several pictures to put in this for you to see. This is the table setting
this is we decided to set this chapter up as a dessert table. And so we have the Swedish chairs and the Dutch mirrors without anything inside them. And so that's a shade. Then I found a piece of wood that's like I don't know if it was sandblasted and bleached and stained, and then put it with cut velvet, which is actually very luxury kind of material. Because I always really like the high and low. When I set a table, when I design a room, you know, I like what.
And so where did you shoot this?
We shot this in David's studio also, and I designed the moldings based on a David Hicks dining room. So, you know, the camera sees everything, which is something I learned. I didn't know that before I made book. So, this is this is a Josiah Wedgwood piece from the Met, which I think is so breathtaking. And then our artist was Max Lamb. I don't know if you guys have heard of Max Lamb, but those are two in each corner, Max Lamb pieces juxtaposed against very old basalt pieces, 18th century pieces. And I thought that was interesting too, how and oddly, Max made these pieces in Wedgwood, England, using the same clay that the Wedgwood pieces use. So I thought that was also a really interesting, I mean, it was absolutely, he had to be the artist to do that because of that connection. And then, you know, today and 200 years ago or 300 years ago. So that was an interesting juxtaposition.
And I just thought that was beautiful.
Just more of black. Yeah. And David, oh my God, that's such a David Stark thing. So he said to me, we are so having that little tree and that present. I said, okay, fine.
And there's wonderful quotes in the beginning of each chapter, which I think are really inspiring. I don't know.
Yeah, our writer helped.
Oh, she did. Okay. I thought it was wonderful what you had for this chapter. But in any case, then we moved to blue and white, which everybody loves.
White. Yeah, we worked with an artist named Tyler Hayes. I don't know if you guys are aware of BDBW in New York. Tyler Hayes, he's phenomenal. Very much a Renaissance artist. And he too is particularly interesting. I chose him because he works out of his studio in Philadelphia, and again, uses his own clay. He's very into upcycling and, you know, the environment, and he uses clay that he digs from his own yard. So I thought that was fascinating. And then when I went to visit him in his studio, he had all of these references to Delft. So, you know, and although blue and white even started in China, you know, it's a Chinese thing, even before the Delft thing. And certainly Ralph Lauren did not invent it.
Sure.
So, you know.
Where was his studio?
His studio was in Philadelphia,
okay. And
but he has shops in New York.
And then where did you create this table?
This was another one that we created at David Stark Design. And I was very influenced. This is a wall that we hand stamped to look like tiles. And I was influenced by a castle in Sweden. And that is, I think it's the Rosenborg Castle. And again, you can see Tyler's pieces and the mix with old Delft, new Delft. And it's a little hard to see, but my knives are, they're Chantilly, they're porcelain, and they were from the collection of Yves Saint Laurent. So.
Do you own them?
I do.
And these were
those are museum pieces, but they're very similar. Those are from the Musée des Arts Décoratifs. The upper right-hand corner is from the DIA, and that's one of two in the world left from the Medicis, a very important urn, and the other two are from the Met, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah, I loved all of those things.
Yeah.
And I couldn't resist this table setting.
Okay, this is our candlesticks. David and I are really, really, really influenced by the hand, especially living I mean, we love our computers, our phones, everything. We wouldn't exist without all of it. But we chose artists that still use, or workshop studios that still use their hand. So that was another criteria, like Tyler and even the Bucciolati and the carving of the bamboo. And this is another example. So our candlesticks are from a gentleman in Paris named Laurent Pumat, and his company is called Farfalus and Farfadet. And his muse is the 18th century. If you look at the candlestick, and they're paper mache. That's the other thing.
That's great.
And if you look at the candlesticks, they're very inspired by the 18th century and the 17th century, but they're wacky. They're off. And I just thought that you can't have a table without candles.
And the
So,
backdrop, what did you use for that? It's beautiful.
well, that is a paper cartoon of an important tapestry.
Okay.
Oh, and the dishes are dishes that I designed for Culture Lab Detroit. They're part of Culture Lab Design. I did them with David Stark, and we had Poabic Pottery do them.
They look beautiful.
And I have begged Poabic to make them. I know this is off track, but it would be superb if they would, but I'm trying. Anyways, I own what there is in the world because I designed them, as does David, and maybe 3 people that they made them for, sold them and don't anymore. And they have a crest, like an old dish at the top that says Poabic, but says our names. So everybody gets credibility for it. And these are the 18th century candlesticks. And one other story I'm going to tell you that's really interesting when you get back to like making like what insects were when they had a mistake. So the curator from the Met told us that with regards to that faience candlestick on the left, that was actually a candlestick that they melted the silver when they had to in France a couple hundred years ago when they had no more money, but they still wanted to make, and they'd sell it for money. So they would make candlesticks in faience because they were so much cheaper, but they were very closely connected to the silver. So
I think it's beautiful. I loved everything about it. And this, by contrast, is a very powerful
Yes,
picture.
this was shot at the DIA in the Kresge Court, which probably almost everybody here knows.
And the Muse.
With the beautiful Diego Rivera mural. But this is a wonderful chapter. This chapter was also our artisans are from Detroit. And they are metal, they're called Smith Shop. And they make just about anything out of metal, out of stainless, anyways, they made some of the cutlery. We designed the pipe fitting candelabra because we thought that was so fitting to go with the industrial background.
Fantastic.
And the blue jean tablecloth and the blue jean napkins. And then we have sort of tray tables, but we added, or tray, ceramic trays for the food. But then we had luxury on there. We have Saint Louis crystal.
Oh, sorry.
And it's okay. Those are the pieces all from Smith Shop. They're amazing. But we have Saint Louis crystal and we have Puifrica silverware. And I chose each piece of cutlery to be from a different pattern.
There's such a wonderful juxtaposition and contrast of different components.
Yeah, that's Smith Shop. And there they are. They're adorable. Gabriel and Amy. They're great in their shop. This is one of my favorites. This is Aptware. The artisan is from Paris, and her name is Sylvie Saint Andre Perrin. And these are just examples of her work.
And describe for everybody, they can see by looking, but I know it. What is classic Aptware? How would you describe it, how it's made? Stylistically.
Sylvie, a couple of things. And I want to tell you one thing quickly. Barbara was the one that introduced me to Sylvie. And Sylvie was just this very humble artist that Barbara brought to David Hicks because Barbara also owned David Hicks Paris. And she insisted, and then Sylvie was launched. So when you walk into Sylvie's studio, there's something that really strikes you. You see all these examples of very old forms. So the idea of Aptware is hundreds of years old. The mixing of clay. I mean, I'm not a ceramicist, so I don't know how to get too technical, but it's not a new thing. What Sylvie does, these are 18th century pieces from the museum. But what Sylvie does is she's kind of come up with her own color story. And if you ever go on her website, you will just be blown away by her range.
Are those some of her plates?
Yeah, those are all her plates. And so this plate is maybe a little more traditional shape and you could kind of see the influence. But her work is so refined and her plates are very thin and really quite beautiful.
So now we're going to talk about one of my favorite people that we share in common too, Isabelle de Boersgraaf.
Yeah, so Isabelle is another artist. Isabelle de Boersgraaf is from Brussels. She's a paper artist. Isabelle would tell you, if you were talking to her, that she has been in love with textiles and patterns since she was a little girl. but she could never afford the real deal, like the fabulous 18th century pieces. So she started to make them in paper. So, and she has done, I mean, her career is huge. She's worked at, I think even at Karl Lagerfeld, the year that he had the fashion show and had paper, she actually did the paper wedding dress juxtaposed against.
You have to look her up because it's phenomenal.
Oh, she's unbelievable.
Provençal clothing, Turkish clothing.
Just beyond.
But in this case,
and she's a very prolific designer, artist. Those dishes are from Villeroy and Bosch, and they're called her chinoiserie plates. She actually designed them.
And that was the theme of this chapter was chinoiserie.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted them to know
and
that.
She made the tablecloth. She hand painted it. And yeah, I mean, she was incredible. And those are two, and there she is in her studio, and you can see some of the robes. The chapter is a really large chapter. We don't have time, but you'll see it in the book. We shot it in 3 different locations. One was in my house, in my daughter's bedroom. We did a breakfast. Another was at a place in New York called De Vera, which is super charming. And we turned it into sort of like a chinois, small, intimate room. And then the one that you just saw was again shot in David's studio, but they're very different. Isabel's work is a part of it, but what's so fascinating about her is her range, and you see it in each chapter, like there she is again, but it's different. This is faux bois, and we even have a faux bois turkey. It's made out of paper.
It's in the center of the table.
And we, again, it's a mixing of textiles, but the Muse was a really special place called Nymphenburg, which you might have heard of, in Nymphenburg, Germany. And they work with artists. They make beautiful dishes, and they are from the 18th century. And like Sèvres, they're a very, very important workshop. And these are their plates that they made, and you would never know that they are brand new. I mean, they're meticulous. So again, it's the hand, and they have the artisans that are still hand painting in the most beautiful way. This is Sèvres, actually, outside of Paris, and this is a part of our plaster chapter. And we were just blown away. This was shot at Stephen Antonson's outside of in Brooklyn. He's an artist in New York and does all kinds of things. And we designed. Oh, there he is. Yeah,
I'm just fascinated.
Oh, and the dishes at that table, I just want to tell you, they're from an artist in Detroit, whose name is Ben Saginaw from Hamtramck Ceramics. And he makes wonderful things. So I'm always trying to support Detroit as much as I can.
But so it was the visit to the Sèvres Museum that really, and you're seeing all these the
plaster molds. And then we thought about, and probably what you're not going to see is that but you'll see it in the book, Stephen designed a plaster table, which we did use in this chapter because I thought, oh my God, a table, and it's part of it. It's plaster. So, yeah. Another Detroit shot. This was amazing. This was our Social Threads chapter, and it was shot at the African Bee Museum outside. This was I think this is really probably my most favorite chapter. I know the gentleman that has built the museum very well and worked with him for many years, Olami Dabbles. This chapter, he taught me a lot, so I'll be very brief, but I'll tell you. The chapter was Social Threads, and we worked with the quilts on the table are from a woman named Loretta Bennett from Gee's Bend, Alabama. She has a huge history, and she's a beautiful designer. I went to Dabbles and I said to him, look, I want to do this. And we've worked together for years. So he and I are fine. We're good friends. So I said, I really want to do this table, but there's a question I have for you. And then there's something that you have to do. I said to him, I can't make a table in your space unless you make something for the table. So he actually it's a little hard to see, but he did the containers out of bricks. There you can see them. We gave him bricks, and he painted and put mirror and did his thing on them. And then we put the flowers inside, and you can see Loretta's quilt, which is fabulous. So what you also see is an 18th century Portuguese plate, and from Laguna B, Venetian glass that's newly made, but it's crushed bead. It's made out of beads. So I said to him, "How are you okay with that?" He said to me, "You know what, Jane, material culture is the one thing, and the beauty is the one thing that we all share, that we all love, and we need to celebrate that." So that's the thing that holds us together. And these things were made with a lot of love and a lot of care by somebody's hands over the years, as was his building. And he said, "I think you should go for it. I think they all need to live together on the same table." I said to him, "You have no idea what you're giving me permission for, because I'm going to do it. You're going to have 18th century Portuguese silver." So there you are. And that's Loretta in her studio, and she's lovely. So
That's our last slide, and we got through it.
great. Oh my
I wasn't
gosh.
sure. Thank you.
Thank you.